Hey guys, I've been getting a lot of sort of like comments and questions asking about digestive issues and stuff like that. And a lot of them are from new subscribers that have come across me in more recent times. And, and sort of I'm repeating myself multiple times. So I decided to actually do a video on, the general sort of digestive issues that people suffer. Now, that they can be for a number of reasons. People could come from a vegan diet, they can come from a sad diet or a vegetarian diet, or even a repeat style diet, which has a lot of carbohydrates. The common thing is a lot of, you know, things which have to do from the symptoms that they're describing have a lot to do with gallbladder issues, plus some have, like stomach acid insufficiency and things of this sort, um, that actually these sort of mild or severe derangements. It varies between people, so it's a sort of a rich tapestry, as one would say, of digestive issues. So I thought I might make a video. It's off the cuff, just the stuff that I would sit there and just type away like mad. Just discuss this without showing any sciencey stuff or any sort of that, because I've covered a lot of that sort of science related stuff, like gallbladder issues. Recently, I had it's not too long ago. I've got a video showing quite clearly a relationship between elevated T3, which you get from a high carbohydrate diet, and gallstones formation. So it's quite clear that a carbohydrate rich diet is contraindicated for a healthy gallbladder. And since the 1960s and 70s and 50s and further back, there was no refrigeration. There wasn't the sort of sophisticated transport systems that we have today in comparison. A lot of that emerged initially after the Second World War because of more cheap energy, electrification, um, new power stations, that were built, coal-fired power station, hydroelectric schemes in the 50s and 60s and onwards around the world, but in particular in a lot of industrialized countries. But if you go back to the 30s and 20s and stuff like that, most toilets were outdoors, and even plumbing was very unsophisticated, and people were still using lanterns. Only very rich people could afford electricity and lighting. Um, so, in general, most of the population after the Second World War, with the massive increase in cheap energy, the improvements in industrial production, and also automation, uh, more sophisticated machine tools and stuff that emerged and progressed after that, meant that, the downside was that we ended up being able to produce junk food a hell of a lot cheaper as the decades went on. Because prior to that, you had only the only thing is what you had is food, and it was generally anything that grew in the ground or walked on the land or swam in the oceans. So that's what you got. Um, and obviously, the only really two big toxins in the food supply at that time were the increasing amounts of seed oils and the increasing amount of refined sugars that were made available, as the decades went on. But prior to that, when we look at 50s, 60s, and 70s, most societies in the industrial world, when you look at it, they were, consuming grains, dairy products, and meats. Those things you could get all year round. But even at that time, it was like sort of two thirds animal foods, and it tends with the animal foods tend to be, like a third, 25 to a third dairy, Obviously, within the Loma Linda area, as I've done a video in the past, if you Google my name and Grundy, or go under the actual the playlist of the blue zones, you'll actually find the Grundy video and talking about the Loma Linda, which was about 50% dairy for the vegetarians. But the general population, it was eggs and dairy was about a third, meats were about a third, and carbohydrates, especially bread, pastas and stuff like that. It was mainly grain-related type things, and tubers and whatever else, potatoes and whatever, those sort of things, certain root vegetables, those were the things that primarily people didn't consume a lot of salady stuff and all that. Another reason why they didn't have a lot of gut problems, because if you look under an electron microscope, fibrous sort of plants, they have all these little nasty hooks. And, if you cook them, like certain things, you cook them, you can actually reduce that damaging effect on the enteric system. But in general terms, most things were cooked back then. There was no raw type vegetables being eaten. They were a bit more sensible, and most of the, and even if you look at old cookbooks, which I have shown in the past, there was pretty much very little, if nothing, in terms of salads and stuff like that. One, it was too expensive to produce them. Nowadays, they're produced in hothouses, and so it's cheap. And most the green plants, which were sort of seasonal spring, like spring type green vegetables and stuff like that, they were all cooked. There was nothing eaten raw. So that broke down to some extent the fibrous sort of stuff, and it was less problematic for the enteric system. But it was more of a little filler and stuff like that. It wasn't the main game. Most of the carbohydrates or the plant foods were primarily, your breads and your tubers and stuff like that. Grains and tubers were the main things. They sort of constitute about a third. Still wasn't as cheap to produce them. It was only at a later stage when it became cheaper. And the food industry, obviously, once it became cheaper, started increasing the amount of refinement and processing, because they could actually sell more and make a big profit margin. But prior to that, people were generally eating less stuff in terms of, it was a mixed diet, but at the same time, most people were still eating butter, they were still eating at home. And it was only actually the rich people that were consuming the oils, because for them it was sort of promoted as, and it doesn't smell like animal foods, sort of attitude. And even big takeaway joints like McDonald's and stuff like that, they were still using tallow up until the 1990s. It was only after that it's really, in the 2000, close to the 2000 and onwards, in the 21st century, where we see mass usage of these oils. Prior to that, it was limited, but it was increasing all the time. Obviously, in the food supply, and obviously that was introducing far higher levels of deuterium, which is damaging to the mitochondria. Where if you go back into that, and I sort of have this attitude, yes, the Randall cycle does play an important role in that, but because of the seasonality in the way people ate and the physical work that people did, it was different. Now, if you're a sedentary and you're on a mixed diet, there was far more problems with that. But most people that worked in the industries as industrial factory workers and or on the land or things like that, because most work was physical back then, even on a mixed diet, you could sort of slow down the fat gain. And also, because you weren't consuming a lot of processed foods, so you weren't taking in massive amounts of seed oils to damage your mitochondria, you were only getting deuterium primarily from from carbohydrates, which isn't, and it was only about a third of your diet. The deuterium levels weren't as high as they are today, which is really massively high in comparison. And so when you look back and you look at those people in the 50s and 60s and stuff like that, they are thinner. They have better capacity to, you know, oxidize, even a mixed diet. They're more physically active. The only people that sort of are as physically active today would be bodybuilders, and they seem to be able to handle, because they're physically active and have high clearance of carbohydrates. You know, I remember my father as a Boilermaker welder. He didn't change his diet, but as a Boilermaker welder, he was skinny. He worked really physically hard. The moment we moved into the actual business, we got into the shop, and he started packing on weight all of a sudden. Again, he was still eating the same food. It hadn't changed his diet, and discouraged us from eating lollies and stuff like that. So that wasn't his style. If the only thing that he did for a period of time was to smoke for a couple of years, you know, on and off just lightly, and then gave that up because Mum was discouraged him. Let's say that, you know, she wasn't happy with him taking that nasty habit up. So that was back in the 70s when most people were still quite skinny. But it made, you know, this big difference, you know, from working physically really hard and potentially in, you know, what we would call calories, which really it's, you know, food mass. But just for people to understand, he was probably on 3,500 equivalent of photonic energy. And so when he moved into the shop and he was not as physically active as he was as a Boilermaker welder, you know, started packing it on. So it does make a big difference. So obviously their physicality was different. And that actually is also shown from a study. There was an old study for in the 1930s on the British public service. And they actually noticed that British public servants were fatter. There were some level of obesity, especially in senior managers and all that were less physically active compared to their staff. And these people were eating very much similar diets, because back then there wasn't the supermarkets, there wasn't the fast food outlets or anything. Most people ate at home. They ate very similar. But again, the factory workers and people on the land and all that, it was much later on. So that they obviously, because they were less physical later on, they started packing it on. So the Randall cycle was still active, but they were at a lower gradient. That's the difference. As Bart calls it, a fader, and a fader is pretty much, you know, like a light, you know, like dimmer is a fader. Now, obviously, it's not a knob or on or off the volume. You know, it's not a knob. It's just it mimics that sort of behaviour. And it has to do with the substrates that, you know, the rate of clearance. Obviously, if you're more physically active, the clearance rate's going to be higher, so the gradient is going to be lower in comparison. Somebody who's an office worker or more sedentary and eating something very similar is going to pack on much more. There is the other angle that I've spoken when I was on Pim's channel and discussed about deuterium and the factor that deuterium is actually damaging the mitochondria. So, you know, your little folds and all that, they get damaged, and that can lower the level of mitochondrial respiration, you know, how much ATP can be produced. So, you know, if you can't oxidize a lot of that, what are you going to do? You're going to store more. So in the past, because of carbohydrates having 155 ppm on average, it took many decades before, and you only notice the older people that were putting on the fat, not younger people, where nowadays, because of the seed oils, which are well over the safe limit of 180, that are in the 255 range, well, 200 and over, up to 255. obviously at those levels, you're doing a lot of mitochondrial damage at a much earlier age from a lot of the processed foods. And so you're reducing your capacity to clear, even if you're slightly a bit more active than somebody else. So if you're not active at all and you're doing a lot of damage, it's hard to get rid of it and oxidize it. So the clearance, your gradient of Randall cycle activation is going to be a hell of a lot higher. So all these things, have a tendency, these lifestyle factors, exposures to things, the functioning of the deuterium. And when we talk about deuterium damage, we're also talking about the gut. Remember, the gut still has to do functions. If a lot of those cells in the gut have got dysfunction, damage, and all that, and they're not functioning properly because of those things that people are eating and all that, or ate in the past, obviously it's going to take a while to basically turn over and change the whole digestive tract. There's a sort of a perception that people have that, I'm on a carnivore diet, immediately it's going to change. Well, it depends where you're starting from. You could be starting from this point of damage, which could be low, or you could be starting from a much higher level of damage than someone else. And so obviously it's going to take you longer to see improvements compared to someone else. And sometimes people, because in the modern era we've learned the pill sort of mentality of, it should work like that sort of attitude. Obviously, it doesn't. And it varies. And people, to get to the level where they have to go all the way to a carnivore diet, which is the species appropriate, people call it an elimination diet. I don't call it an elimination diet. I call it that you've got rid of all the non-species appropriate stuff, and you've gone to foods which are species appropriate, which are animal foods. And so obviously, you're going to lower the inflammation, you're going to lower the general poor functioning of your body. You're going to sort of eliminate a lot of those problems, but it doesn't mean you're going to heal like instantly or quickly. And depending on your age, the level of damage, underlying genetics, and a lot of other factors, other environmental exposures that may be inhibiting your progress. You could be exposed on a farm, as an example, to certain chemicals or residues, or and a lot of even people spraying a couple of kilometres away, things float through the wind, and obviously you will breathe in certain things, particulates from that environment, depending on where you are located in rural areas. Probably less problematic if you're in a pastoral sort of setting compared to a heavily agricultural area where there's a lot of food production of the carbohydrate variety, a lot of plants, a lot of pesticide use and stuff like that. So that's going to have a different effect on your system compared your proximity to those things. So there's a lot of variability in cities. It could be mold, and there's a lot of other factors, or chemical exposures at work. So there's multiple factors that could be playing to, that it's so it's not just the existing damage from the poor diet, but there could be other environmental factors that are compounding that you're unaware of. And a lot of people are. And sometimes I have to go through a long series of question, comments to, I think that it's really, really important to know your environment. So, talk to your work colleagues. And sometimes they may be having similar symptoms to you. And you go, okay, so what's happening in this? I'm working in this sort of environment, maybe request an air sample be taken to assess what's in that environment. I think there are kits you can actually purchase and then send it to a lab to get tested. And that could be an eye-opener and say, oh, I'm being exposed to all these things. Do I want to work here? Because your employer may not be interested in actually finding out, as an example. Obviously, I'm not telling you what to do. There are some rules about these things. So I'm not telling you to violate any corporate rules or whatever, stuff like that. I'll leave that to your discretion. How you go about it. You may, when you get home, try and get samples off your clothing and get that tested. And then that way, you're only testing your own stuff. You're not doing anything on site for, where you could be violating some sort of rules, as an example. So I'm not telling you what to do, but these are things that could be affecting your health as well. And you may not be aware, especially people working in certain job types, categories, which may have a higher level of exposure of chemicals and pesticides and many other things. But obviously also, there could be, if there's a mouldy smell in the house or at the workplace, there could be a mold exposure. So, and some people are more sensitive than others, depending on their detox pathways. So some can manage it better than others. So there's all these factors that could be interplaying, and you go, why am I feeling like shit? And then, some people notice it. They notice a difference. They go on holidays. They go, I don't feel like that. What is it? So that's a big giveaway. It should be a big sign saying, back home, I'm being exposed to something. I need to work out what it is, whether it's at work or at home that I'm being exposed. So it can be a hell of a lot more complicated. As I say, I don't provide these services. I'm just providing information. That's what I'm doing in this video, trying to provide information to people to say, you need to go and do an assessment. From a regular doctor, you've got Buckley's chance. I'll be honest. You've got Buckley's chance of being assessed properly or being looked at properly. You would have to go to a naturopath. Obviously, they're pushing stuff as well. I understand the medical system, to a large extent, has a lot of dysfunction in it and a lot of issues. But if you can find, a low-carb naturopathic doctor or a keto naturopathic doctor, or, somebody that's more carnivore one, somebody that's a bit more sensible. There are some carnivore doctors as well that are a bit more cluey about these things, both environmental and non-environmental causes. So you can potentially get sent to get some proper testing. There's the cost bit side of it. What can be covered by insurance or the public system. If you're going through the public system in different countries, what's covered and what isn't. Certain naturopaths and certain doctors that are more sympathetic to doing those tests. So you got to hunt for them. Google in your country, try and find out which doctors specialise in certain things, like environmental exposures and all that. They're likely to know how to get to work the system in that regard. So you have to do a bit of your own running around. It's your health. You've got to take charge of your health. You can't expect another person like me or others, the other end of the world, to basically sort out your health problems. We can give you some ideas and stuff like that. This is why I'm doing this video, to try and give people ideas that they need to go and get assessed and get tested for a number of these things to see, if they've got deficiencies, hair mineral tests. The more radical one would be biopsies, but those type of tests are very expensive. But they really tell you, if you can afford it, it's probably the way to go to really find out are my cells deficient in certain things that are not there? What's happening? So you can actually get some greater details in that regard, where, your general serum blood tests don't really tell you much, because most of the stuff is bound, iron is going to be bound, and the amount in serum is very low. It doesn't really tell you what's stored away, what's in cells, and stuff like that. It's a proxy, but it doesn't really tell you proper stuff in that regard. And you can get a lot of variability because circadian rhythms and different times of the day can actually vary the numbers. So it's a mixed bag. Like a hair mineral test will tell you, because for the simple reason that it tells you over a long period of time, like months, what's actually accumulated in your hair, and they can actually test it and go, okay, this is the average amount that's in your, that would be present in your system, sits in those cells, and we can actually work out a much more accurate picture. So there are certain tests, if you're exposed to certain things, especially chemicals and heavy metals and stuff like that, they'll also show in a hair mineral test. So there's a number of different tests, and there's constantly new stuff coming out continuously. I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know all of it. I know some. So you need to find people that are doing these testings all the time and looking into new testing methods and all that. So that's why I say do try and find naturopaths that are in the low carb space in general. They're going to be more clued up on these different types of tests compared to many others. So that's the sort of stuff you want to be doing to try and get a gauge exactly where you're at in that regard. Now, getting to the crux of the stuff in terms of our digestive tract. So doing that video on the T3 and its relation to gallbladder, when you have high T3 on a high carbohydrate diet, so all those type of people, from my own experience, I've noticed that a lot of people that have come in particular from a plant-based diet tend to have the reasons for their digestive problems tend to be primarily related to their gallbladder. And this could be a problem because now most people also, because the range for your stomach pH tends to be between 1.5 to about 3.5. Now, if you're eating a lot of carbohydrate-rich foods and all that, it will tend to be hot in their higher pH, which means your stomach acidity is much lower. So when you start eating animal foods, it'll drop, but it may not drop to that much lower level. You may have overgrowth of bacteria overgrowth, yeast overgrowth. All these things can inhibit the amount because of the fermentation that you've generated throughout your whole digestive tract. And so that can be a problem in itself. But the thing is, a lot of people forget is one of the big things that is a problem is the gallbladder. So if you've been consuming a lot of a high carbohydrate diet, have been running much higher T3s than a species appropriate level, and what happens is, that's indicated for basically for carbohydrate metabolism, because pyruvate dehydrogenase requires, beta oxidation doesn't, but pyruvate dehydrogenase requires so you can produce acetyl-CoA in the Krebs cycle, requires T3. So it's a requirement. And that's why but that higher level also creates these derangements in combination with much lower levels of intake of fat, creates these combinations of derangements in the functioning of the gallbladder. And over time, that just becomes, you get more sludge, you get more stones, you don't get good bile flow. Obviously, you're not getting enough of methionine or cysteine, things like that, to produce enough taurine. You're not eating enough animal foods to get enough taurine. As a consequence, then you can't actually produce quality bile, because quality bile, when it comes through the bile ducts, through the pancreas, and then into the top of the small intestine, what it does is it acts as an alkalizing agent, so it increases the pH, so it lowers the acidity to protect the entire small intestine and obviously all the way down to the colon. And I usually say to people that this whole track down, and if you take a look at physiology books, I'll actually show you that the pH jumps quite a bit into the 6 and slightly higher, and then which is more getting to the more sort of alkaline, close to and 7 and slightly semi above, and that's the actual bile coming in that has that effect. And the bile actually will run right through to the base of it, of the small intestine, right through. And actually, that's where 95% of it gets recycled. Only about 5% ends up in the colon and then out the other end. So about 95% gets recycled. Guess what happens at the base where your cecum would have been in the past, but now there's an appendix there. And then the connection to the colon where the other, that little area there at the base of it, at the bottom, the pH drops again. So it becomes more acidic. It's in the physiology books. You can actually see that's because the bile has just been removed. It's been recycled. 95% is there. So the pH changes quite a bit. And then when it goes into the actual colon, then the pH changes again, slightly increases again. So it's related. But also what happens is, as that bile runs through, it also cleanses the small intestine of bacterial, yeast overgrowth and things like that. So it has a cleansing of the small intestine. This is important in terms of SIBO overgrowth and things like that. This is why people on high carbohydrate diets, low fat diets, tend to get a lot of these overgrowth issues of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or yeast infections and stuff like that. That's the consequence. You don't have good quality bile to cleanse the small intestine. So you don't want you want very little bacteria in the small intestine. And that also will reduce the amount of bacteria that potentially could get through, a damaged lining or a leaky gut into the bloodstream. That increases lipopolysaccharides, LPS, and also in acute or extreme cases can actually also increase sepsis, which is very dangerous. So this is why bile is important. Mummy's milk is full of it, so, and, the sort of precursors to produce it, which is taurine, pretty much. Let me just put it that way. So that's the advantage at that age. And then once we get off mother's milk, what do? We start giving more plants to kids. The complete opposite of what mother's milk was giving. And so obviously then you have multiple decades of really stuffing up your gallbladder function. And these are why the problems of overgrowth and, you don't see it in tribal people, but you see it in modern people that are eating far too many carbohydrates and end up with these yeast infections, bacterial overgrowth, stomach dysfunction because of overgrowth in the stomach. It goes from the small intestine into the stomach and can come up all through the esophagus and create other issues regarding to that as well. And we've seen candida overgrowth that, like, people, have really like just a white tongue and the entire mouth area is just like white. And it's really because of, this just uncontrolled overgrowth. because of those sort of diets. And then people do the cleanses and all that. Just go back to a species-appropriate diet. Over time, will fix it. Obviously, I have done videos covering that. I'm not going to cover here. Candida overgrowth, I've covered in a number of videos. Just Google them and you'll find my name against them and get ideas. But generally speaking, this is what is happening because you don't have these proper functioning, digestive part elements of a digestive system are not functioning properly. Now, the problem is if you try and use taurine, which is a good thing to sort of rebalance the gut microbiome, done a video on that covering it, about the key thing that actually sorts out the gut microbiome. If you go to my playlist of digestive issues, the video's there in one of them. So I don't recommend people use taurine if they've got a gallbladder issue. So they go and get tested because I can't do the tests. So if you're noticing you're not, especially if you're seeing in your stool fats, like, pieces of fat coming through and all that, that means you're not digesting fats. You've got a gallbladder issue. It's either a problem in the ducts, which is even worse, or it's in the gallbladder itself. So the last thing I would do is try and fix the stomach first, even though the stomach needs to be sorted out at some stage, with taurine and a few other things to reduce, like taking HCl and stuff like that, to increase the acidity, to sort of force the overgrowth of H. pylori or candida down, to be able to allow stomach acidity to increase. The downside is that you could do that, but then you would have to take, until you fix your gallbladder, you would have to take for some period of time, bile salts, like 2 hours after a meal, in order to prevent carnivore diarrhea, because what happens is your gut lining is sensitive, in your small intestine and your colon, and you don't want to be putting high levels of acidity into either your enteric system. So you need to be very careful about that. So what the body does, and the body's smart, it goes, okay, this fool doesn't have enough bile, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flood, suck in, draw in water. And if you're doing this constantly, this is going to create dehydration as well, you can understand. And it's going to flush the enteric system in order to buffer the high level of acidity. That's what it's doing. It's a buffering approach. So I tend to say to people, don't try and sort those sort of things out. I try and get people to look at slightly reducing their fat. They may have to look at, like, if they can tolerate dairy, go for dairy. It's got a bit of sugar, it's got a bit of fat, but not too much. Trim the steaks. Most people have body fat, so they're not going to basically waste away, but at least they can actually take in. Or another option is ketones, buying ketones, to use ketones for a period of time if you're skinny or all that, to provide yourself with energy in order to bypass some of these issues. So it's not an easy thing, I understand, for a lot of people, but you can pretty much just use bile, as I said, bile salts, bile. Bovine bile normally is what people use in a lot of the supplements. 2 hours after the meal, if it's a regular meal, if you've eaten quite a lot, and under those sort of circumstances, I don't recommend people eating like large meals. Now, I know that generally speaking, having 1 or 2 meals a day but remember, you're not a regular person. You've got problems. So you need to pretty much try and get sufficient protein for protein synthesis, 30 plus grams, even though that's, I've talked about it's irrelevant, where, you can eat massive amounts and your body just can handle it, and you can actually still do protein synthesis hours later. That's not the issue. That's not why I'm saying this. I'm saying to reduce the amount of work your stomach has to do. So I can break that down, and then you can throw in, before it actually discharges it into the gut, you can throw in the alkalizing agent in order to avoid the diarrhea effect. Because if it's got enough, it will reduce the pH. Sorry, it will increase the pH, reduce the acidity. And that means the body won't have to draw water to protect the gut lining. So that's an important thing that you can actually do. The other thing is, how do you solve a gallbladder issue? Depends what sort of state of affairs is. But there is a supplement called TUDCA, TUDCA, TUDCA. You combine that with choline, and over time that improves the bile. And, it is, TUDCA is molecules which have taurine in them. It's sort of a combination of certain things. And it's the type of stuff that actually builds is component elements of the bile itself. It's similar in that regard. But what it allows is to try and build up that. Now, some people, if they're not seeing results, some improvements in that area, they may have to take milk thistle, because they could have one of the enzymes may not be functioning properly. I usually say to people, just take milk thistle, because I don't know, and there's not very good tests to be able to determine whether the FXR enzyme is working properly or not. And that plays a big role in sort of recycling also the bile. So we can repackage it in the liver and then push it out again and try and actually slowly clear out the sludge and break down those stones that may be in there, large or small or varied sizes. There's a lot of variation between people, and some people tend to produce a bit more sludge like myself. Others don't, like my father, just big stones. So there are variations between people. So it's, whether it's specific type of carbohydrate combinations or things, nobody knows. We don't have any real research. We just know that there is variability. Some think that it could be genetics. Others think that it's probably the type of foods or combination between genetics and the type of carbohydrates consumed. There's a lot of speculations out there about that. I'm not really concerned about that, because at the end of the day, if you've got a problem, you've got a problem. You've gone in, you've scanned and you've identified you've got a gallbladder issue. Usually know that, if you've got discomfort under your right rib cage, that usually indicates stones. If you don't have a lot of discomfort, but you still have, you've got malabsorption of fats, then it's either the stomach is not working well, or both, or the gallbladder is actually has too much sludge. That means you don't have a lot of stones or very little stones, but you've got a lot of sludge, which could be backing up in the actual bile ducts, which is really making it difficult. They're definitely, if it's, I would be looking at that 3 combinations still of TUDCA, milk thistle, and choline. 2 grams. We don't want any more than 2 grams. That's fine. Excessive choline does have its side effects. 2 grams is more than enough. You're getting about, if it's betrate, it's about 40%, which is about nearly 80. Some of the foods you're getting close to a gram. So as long as you're getting a gram in total, that's good. Depending on the severity of your condition, if it's the diagnosis comes back that it's a bit more severe, then I would up my choline intake to try and get it up to about 1.5 total grams, and or experiment up to 2 in total. So you've got to look at the label and see how much. It's usually about 40% in the choline bitrate type. You can get pure choline under those sort of circumstances. Just take 1 or 1.5 if you get pure. So they're a bit more pricey. There's a few companies that do produce it, but not, so just Google, because there's so many variations. I'm not going to post any specific supplements. Look at the Amazon, look at iHerb, look at these sort of sites, or Google different sites in your own country, because there's a lot of variations, a lot of postal differences and all that. Don't expect me to basically, I can give you what I get. If you're in Australia, that's easy. I could say, yep, this is what I get from these sites, done. But if you're in other countries overseas, I know a lot of people ask me and they don't even tell me which country they come from. And I have to ask them. So if you're going to ask for supplements, tell me which damn country you're in, and I can tell you immediately, yeah, here's a link, or I can tell you, I don't know. Go and search for yourself. So it is what it is. So just accept that. I'm not going to run around for you. If I know, I'll give you a reply. But if you have enough brains to Google, most people do. So do it yourself in that regard. Now, once we get the gallbladder sorted out, let's say somebody's got both a stomach problem and a gallbladder problem, focus on the gallbladder. We want that to work properly, so we don't end up with, a lot of issues with loose stools and stuff like that. And then we can focus on the stomach, and that's when we throw in 6 grams or slightly more, up to 8 if you're a big person. If you're a small person, 4 of taurine in there, in order to and also I would also use in combination HCl in order to increase the acidity of the stomach, and also with taurine to improve the proton pumps, which it does. I've done one on stomach. If you look Harris Parnell stomach, it'll actually give you the video and provide you the specific information. And so to suppress H. pylori and improve the functioning, if you've got H. pylori, which a large part of the population do have, you won't get rid of it ever. But what you can do is suppress it. And it seems to basically, people that don't have it at all seem to have higher rates of asthma compared to people that do have it. So it's not all, it does seem to have some benefits. It's associated. We don't have clear science in this. But anyway, even if it wasn't, you can't really get rid of the damn thing. All you can do is suppress it so you can have a proper functioning stomach, so you can break down the food that you're eating. So this is important. And so once you've actually sorted that out, then things are more manageable, and the rest of the healing, because you're absorbing properly nutrients, the rest of the healing of the body will follow naturally, depending on how much damage it is. But it's key and critical to focus on gallbladder first, always, to avoid a lot of the, let's say, unfortunate side effects that come with, if you focus on the stomach, fix the stomach, and then you create another issue, which is you don't have the bile, or you have to buy bile then in order to deal with it. And it's quite expensive, I can tell you, especially if you're using quite a lot every single day for months. So it's best to fix the actual gallbladder, and then it's much easier and cheaper to fix the stomach and some of the other stuff, and then get things working properly in less time. And so, you may have to do HCl only about a month or a couple of weeks. Some people can notice, better stomach improvements even in a shorter amount of time. So, once you've used those two and suppressed the H. pylori and improved the functioning, and you're getting higher levels of acidity, which the acidity itself suppresses the H. pylori as well. That's why H. pylori tries to reduce acidity in the stomach by interfering with the proton pumps. So, that's where the problem lies as well. But that's a consequence of inappropriate diets that create a pH of 3.5 or 3, which is a carbohydrate-rich sort of plant-based diet that can actually exacerbate the functioning and actually allow overgrowth to happen in the first place. So people that come from that sort of background have high histamine levels because they've got deranged. Remember, a large part of your immune system is in the actual gut itself. Histamines are part of the immune function. Okay, they're not bad. They're actually neither good or bad. The overexpression means that you've got high inflammation. That's what it's telling you. It's telling you, I've got a problem I need to fix. You don't try and suppress histamines, you try and fix the problem, because histamines have an important role to play in the immune response. You don't want to derange that. You want to basically have it functioning properly. And if you've got a properly functioning system, your body will produce enough DAO that it requires and no more, because it's regulated, and no more to actually control those functions. Short term, you could use a bit, but I sort of encourage people not to really go down that pathway to a large extent. If it's acute, really severe, yes, for to sort of try and manage that. But ultimately, what you want to be doing is you want to be trying fixing the big players, which is the gallbladder, stomach, fix those, and most of the other stuff goes away. It does really go away. Now, in terms of the actual the functioning of the immune system inside the gut, the two most important things there, obviously, if you've got a gallbladder issue, you're not going to take taurine, which is important, but bile itself and bile salts also help. But the other key thing, which helps with tight junctions, is vitamin D, and also regulates the immune system and reduces this uncontrollable histamine release. So it regulates that. Obviously, taurine long-term suppresses histamines, suppresses spermidine, which is the sort of the factor that actually, yes, it is similar to the stuff factor that's inside your balls, gentlemen, but it's also, that's fine to be there, but you don't want it being expressed inside your gut, because what it does is it actually proliferates the overgrowth of little organisms, and too many of them. And if that happens for too long, you end up with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and other types of overgrowth of other little organisms. So you don't want to encourage that. And what taurine does is actually lower and regulate the mechanisms that control histamine and control spermidine, and so brings the level of bacterial communities inside to their sort of natural level where they should be based. Now, obviously, some people may have bacterial imbalances or loss of species. If you re-regulate your gut and you've always had these species, they could be in your appendix. Your appendix is where your gut microbiome is stored. So once you actually suppress the pathogenics, re-regulate the system with taurine, then they will start increasing the beneficial ones, and you'll actually get improvements in the functioning of your gut. So that's an important thing. Now, obviously, from excessive antibiotics abuse, because that's what it is, abuse in many cases, most people have very mild secondary infections that would clear up normally. And many people don't even have secondary infections and they still take antibiotics. For the life of me, I can't understand. I recently, when I had the flu, the lovely influenza A, doctor checked me. I was sick as a dog and coughing like mad, but I had no secondary infection and did not sustain a secondary infection. Obviously, I was taking taurine through that whole period, and good levels of vitamin D, which were regulating through my system, the immune system, to be able to keep these things under control. So a species-appropriate diet and fat-soluble vitamins that come primarily from a species-appropriate diet or the sun are going to basically keep these systems working properly and regulated properly as well. So that's important. So, things that I've talked about before, sun, meat, are very important in our lifestyle, because there are lifestyle things as well. But the other thing is that when we're actually looking at the gut lining itself, sometimes they're from excessive amount. There is an issue, a separate issue with people that have had their appendix removed. I'll get to that in a sec. But people that may have had like severe abuse of antibiotics through, some kids like massive amounts through their younger years. And as a consequence, a whole lot of species have been wiped out. And it tends to be within the bifidobacteria range and the lactobacillus range. Now, there are some brands that actually are useful. I'll put one of the brands that actually has a number of species and all that that's really good. It's got an enteric coating, goes all the way down. So we'll put that into the actual description. So if you've gone and done a gut microbiome test and you've actually found that you've got very little bifido, very little lactobacillus strains, you've lost them. Now, due to abuse of antibiotics. Now, there is another angle to that as well. Some people as well with, let's say, the COVID virus, plus seem to have lower levels of both, especially those who get long COVID, bifidobacteria and lactobacillus strains. So this sort of approach would help those people. So sometimes getting a broad spectrum, especially getting like an enteric capsule that will go all the way down into the colon and repopulate, is a really important thing for people to do in that regard. And sometimes the diet may be perfect, everything may be perfect, your gallbladder is working perfect, your stomach lining is working perfect, but you've still got some low-grade inflammation because you've got too many pathogenics and not being suppressed well enough. And because it could be because you've got a deranged microbiome. The diet is starting to improve the makeup, the composition, because it will over time. But a quicker way to sort of speed that whole process up and get rid of that low-grade inflammation may be to take for a month or two one of these enteric capsules to change the composition down there, which then will have a suppressive effect on the pathogenics by changing the composition within the colon. So these sort of strategies that we can use to improve those different areas of the digestive system. Now, obviously, you got to test. A lot of people will tell me, I've got these symptoms and I think I've got this. I heard this on this site or Reddit, or I went to the Discord and somebody complained that they had this and similar symptoms. And as I've pointed out to a number of people, a lot of symptoms can be very similar for a whole lot of raft of conditions that are not even related directly to gut issues. They can be related to other things. So it's complicated. And it's impossible for anybody to diagnose somebody from a distance. Now, consultancy can help, but I don't do consultants. I've got a day job. I just don't have the time. Did it for a small period of time and it nearly burnt me out. It's just not viable for me. I just don't have enough time to deal with those things. I struggle with trying to get enough videos out, let alone doing consultancies. Impossible. Now, there are other people that do. I usually recommend for general carnivore-related stuff, Bart K, for addictions, Pim Johnson, and, for bodybuilding, body composition, all that sort of stuff, Jonathan. But at the same time, what I'm trying to say to people is that you need to go and test these things, and you need to have a doctor that you can work with. I find that low-carb naturopathic doctors are going to be the easiest to work with. They're a bit more cluey about a lot of these things and more up-to-date with a lot of the testing as well, where many of the others, you're going to be struggling to try and get the right tests to work out what the hell's going on and all that. Because at the end, you really need to work out. Now, if you work out that your gallbladder's fine, then I would be focusing on stomach, and usually by combining HCl and seeing how you react, taurine and vitamin D at 5,000 IUs. Most of that stuff gets sorted out very fast. Within a month or two, gets sorted out pretty fast. And then the only low grade, which you may go and get tested after about 3 months, and you can still see there's a sort of some low grade level of inflammation in your system, and you go, okay, I've probably got a gut microbiome which isn't perfect. And then you can consider, let me just click on Harry's description on that, and I'll order these capsules to try and get some strains in to try and actually help along the process. It will happen on a species appropriate diet, because a lot of the, sort of, especially in the dairy stuff or cheeses and stuff like that, there's a lot of lactobacillus and stuff like that. And a lot of people usually go, I've just eaten yogurt, I drink milk, but I'm, my stomach's, but I eat some yogurt and I feel a bit better. Well, obviously because it's a fermented food that, and even though it's got histamines, again, this is the misunderstanding that people have. It's not it's the derangement of the immune system, which is the issue. It's not, body can deal with histamines, even in the diet. It's the derangement that is actually causing these, so that's where the problem lies. So your mast cell activation that's happening, that's because it's not being properly regulated, or there are things that haven't been resolved that are causing that excessive activation of the immune cells inside your gut. Anyway, back to what I was trying to say is that then you can look at repopulating and sort of sorting out that function to eliminate that low grade. These are the sort of approaches. That's why I say most people, because, and I'll link somewhere up here the gallbladder one, that gallbladder video. It's really important that people understand that if you've been on a high carbohydrate diet of any sort, what I find for a large proportion of people that come to me with digestive problems, I find that they have some level of issue with their gallbladder. It does not surprise me. And I know a lot of people are looking at a whole lot of other things and are ignoring the gallbladder. It's because they don't understand the consequences of elevated T3 for a very long time on these high carbohydrates diets. And nobody's looked at that really to understand that relationship that exists. And unfortunately, it's an associated relationship, but it is there. And even in the medical literature, they know that people that have very high T3 levels, they see muscle wasting. This is hyperthyroidism, as it's called, but also they see higher amounts of gallbladder issues. So it's a very strong association, let's put it that way, in that regard. Now, it may not be directly the T3. That could be an associated factor due to the diet that people are doing. Because the body, if you're eating more carbohydrates, in order to go from pyruvate into pyruvate dehydrogenase, that complex of enzymes that take the pyruvate and convert it into acetyl-CoA to put it into the Krebs cycle, in order for that to happen, you need T3, as I've pointed out. And so obviously but that also means that you're eating less fat. So the consequence of that is use it or lose it. If you're not pushing out bile and it's accumulating and very little comes out, only small amounts because you're only consuming small amounts of fat, obviously the stuff's going to stay there. You're not having enough taurine. You're not having enough to have quality. You're using more cysteine to produce a lower quality type of bile. And plus there, you don't have the choline to clear out, because you need the choline to emulsify and help clear out that cholesterol, because through the bile, excess cholesterol is being dumped, but you can't do the clearance. So it'll accumulate there and harden. It's not the cholesterol that's the problem. The body produces, even if you don't eat cholesterol, you'll produce cholesterol. This is the normal thing because you need it. But then it needs to clear it, any excess, and it does it through the bile. But if you're not eating foods that will actually activate that system to push through, you're going to, over time, derange it and create dysfunction. And then it can't do that. And not only that, you see in vegans in particular, you'll see like manganese toxicity, because 90% of the manganese is not the problem isn't the manganese in the diet. The problem is you can't clear it, because 90% of it gets cleared out through the bile. And if that's not functioning properly, then it's accumulating into the system. It can't be pushed out of the liver through the bile and out to be pooped out. That's the problem. And so, because people, again, heavy metal toxicity. Well, if your bile is not working properly, you can't detox. Your liver does the detox, and then your bile not only does all these other functions for you to digest things and all that, but it also pushes things out and gets rid of them. Xenoestrogens and a whole lot of other things. Oh, I can't lose weight. I've got high xenoestrogens in my system. I can't clear things out. Again, gallbladder. It's that nexus of the gallbladder that people neglect or don't focus on. And they're focusing on all these other things. I do cleanse, that's not going to help you. it may create a whole lot of other problems, like people doing cleansers to flush out with salt cleansers. That's really helpful to derange your gut microbiome even further by eliminating certain types of beneficial bacteria. Wonderful. It's illogical. Your liver does all the detox. Phase 1 and phase 2 detox. They require amino acids for 2 and a number of B vitamins, and including glutathione and many other things. And phase 1 is more the B vitamins and then, your glutathione and taurine and for both these things and choline that are playing their role in phase 1 and phase 2. So if you're not getting this stuff in your diet, well, then those things are not working properly. And if you've got and you end up with a dysfunctional gallbladder, then the consequence of that is that the gallbladder is going to be not going to be working very well. And if it's not working very well, then you're going to have all these downstream effects. And just on that point on T3 is really important. Remember, I don't demonize T3. I don't demonize insulin. I don't demonize any hormones or whatever. If they're out of whack, they're out of whack because you're putting the wrong stuff down your throat. High insulin isn't the problem. It's, that high signaling is saying, we've got a problem here we need to resolve. Now, if you're sticking down your throat too many contraindicated things, well, then you've got the construct of insulin resistance, but it really is just amplification of the signal, trying to tell the body you need to clear this stuff out of the bloodstream. That's what it's saying. It's not insulin resistance. It's, insulin signaling, a more amplified insulin signaling, telling the body you need to get this stuff out of the actual bloodstream because it's causing too much damage. That's what it's actually saying. We don't like to use these fancy words rather than describing exactly what's happening and exactly what it's doing, because the body's not stupid. The body's saying, this is a problem, or this has emerged, or this, I need to signal and tell these cells and tell all that what's happening and what they need to do and try to mitigate the situation or try to alter things or that. Let's try to clear this and then go and repackage that into triglycerides and then export it to get it out. We convert it into triglycerides. Oh, triglycerides are so bad. No. It's the smart way for the body to basically take the excess glucose, convert it to trigs and export it and put it away. But if you're doing it every day, obviously it's an issue. But the body knows how to sort out issues in the short term. The long term, if you're constantly getting the body to do these things, it just means the waistline increases until it gets to a certain level where it can't really increase, and then you end up with really deranged, adipose tissue, fat cells, basically. So, but that's, yeah, then you're in the type 2 diabetics and, morbidly obese and all these other sort of health issues. But we need to stop blaming hormones for the stuff that we're actually shoving down our throat. mTOR is not a bad thing. IGF-1 is not a bad thing. You remove those, you'll die. You limit those, you will also die. They are fundamental. If you want osteoporosis and sarcopenia, just get drugs to lower IGF-1, mTOR, and insulin. You suppress those, you won't get, the signaling that you require sufficient to basically have good bone formation and good muscles. So that's not the problem. It's where the signaling happens. And we know you consume protein, you get leucine. Leucine signals to the musculoskeletal structure and tells it increase IGF-1, increase mTOR, increase insulin signaling, inside those tissues and make them bigger, grow them, stronger bones, stronger muscles. That's a good thing. You want that because that's going to mean you're going to be more robust in older age. But then you take carbohydrates, same signaling happens, but in the wrong tissue. It's in the fat cells where IGF-1, insulin, mTOR are being activated. See the difference? Different tissue type, different signaling. Again, the signaling isn't the problem. It's what's happening in that tissue that is the problem. That's the problem. You know, you're growing the wrong type of tissue in your body. And so, you know, don't blame the hormones, blame the stuff that you've just put down your throat, which is species inappropriate, that caused the problem. We need to get the right language. We're not using the right language. We're using the wrong language and blaming hormones and genes and stuff like that as if they're the culprits. No, it's the stuff that you're putting down that is activating them to function in a certain way and telling the, you know, the body to function a certain way. And even when it's actually putting stuff away in the adipose tissue, it's doing it because it wants to clear it out of the bloodstream, reduce it from the cells, what's trying to push, you know, pushing that gradient up of the Randall cycle activation. It's trying to lower that so things can start functioning again properly. That's what it's trying to do. It's doing the smart thing. The body's not dumb. It's dumb people that are putting dumb things down there, the wrong things down their throat that are causing these derangements. And they're not actually, I call them derangements, but I call them the wrong type of signals that the body's forced to do in order to deal with a problem that we've created ourselves by putting the wrong stuff down our throats. That's what it really is. And we need to call things as they are, not all this nonsense that people come up with, all these fancy names because they want to sound intelligent or make themselves interesting. You know, I've come up with a new name for this, another bullshit thing, rather than just being trying to honestly understand the complexity and the interplay. It's a dynamic system. It's always in interplay. You know, even circadian rhythms affect the hormones, the way they interplay throughout the day, everything, what you put in your throat, the environmental things. You walk past a vehicle and there is hydrocarbons that you smell, you know, you're jogging and you smell it, you ingest even more through your nostrils and all that. Guess what it does? It actually has an effect on your insulin. It actually will raise it a bit. Most people are unaware of these things. And also it will raise slightly your blood sugar as well. Again, people are unaware of this. So, you know, where steady state cardio sort of jockey contraindicated. But if you're going to do any sort of that sort of activity, don't do it in a busy street with a whole lot of vehicles. Go to a park and do it. You're not going to, you know, where it's going to be a hell of a lot, you know, the air environment is going to be much better. So it's not, you know, while the food is the low hanging fruit, the big one, the big player, there's also these minor players as well that were ignorant. And sometimes, depending on the type of health issues, it can, you know, like chemicals and radiation and whatever else, that it can be a quite big player as well in certain conditions. So let's not discount that as well. But the general thrust of this sort of video that I'm trying to explain to people is that you need to sort of have, when you're looking at digestive issues, you need to take things from the key components that are going to play a role and focus on those. So I always say, when you've got digestive issues, the first thing you need to focus on is the gallbladder. Because the gallbladder is the thing that's going to be problematic. You've got heavy metal issues. In particular, always go and check the gallbladder first. you've got digestive issues, always go and check the gallbladder first. Because if that's not functioning, it's not fun, it's not clearing out things. And so detox, as far as I'm concerned, is at the foundation of detox is your gallbladder working properly and your liver, obviously. So if the liver's not working properly, obviously, then detox is really going to be poor. But, at the end of the day, even if your liver is semi-functional well, and they usually, if you've got a dysfunctional liver, you've got a dysfunctional, but that's where things like TUDCA, choline, milk thistle, they all help to improve the actual liver. Now, if you've got like severe cirrhosis of the liver, you're a friggin' alcoholic or something like that, or been consuming a lot of fructose, like Salad Boy is doing now, juicing, things like that, and you've caused a lot of fatty liver, a lot of some level of cirrhosis, then you may need to take for a period of time, 1 to 3 months, alpha lipoic acid, which is a major electron donor, which, so it's like donating a lot of electrons to stabilize tissue. So we're talking about like a major antioxidant. Now, obviously, antioxidants are not a good thing to be taking exogenous antioxidants for a long period of time. They do have a negative relationship. We've done a whole lot of animal studies, and we've shown that until intracellular antioxidant systems decline, which is in human life, it's about over 70. I've said this before. Then antioxidants seem to have a benefit. Prior to that, they actually increase mortality because the body needs a bit of damage in order to upregulate the healing pathways. If the healing pathways are suppressed by too many external antioxidants, not a good thing, let alone things like too much vitamin C will create a whole lot of oxalate, not a good thing, and too much vitamin E, especially because it's not the complex. It's usually a high dose, and it's going to be a problem to create like a sort of a pro-oxidant. People should rely on the intracellular antioxidants to do the job. Glutathione. If you're eating a species-appropriate diet, you'll get the components like the minerals and the vitamins, the cofactors for the enzymes, plus you'll be getting the proteins, the amino acids that you require to synthesize glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase, these intracellular antioxidants, and they will be produced to the level that the body requires them, not more, not less. This is important. The body actually knows how much it needs and how much it doesn't need. It won't excessively produce or underproduce. It'll produce exactly what the body needs. And we should leave the body to work out the antioxidant to sort out that sort of stuff. And if you're eating species appropriate, you're going to be generating much less, which means that the body will express to the level just to clear that small peroxidation issue that may exist, in particular with lipid peroxidation, which will be at trace levels. I've covered, there's a PUFA playlist that covers all this sort of stuff, and it shows that even if you cook pork for 3 hours, you're going to get very only trace levels. In the food matrix, animal fats are really damn stable compared to plant fats and many others. So that's important. But the key thing here is to remember gallbladder first, gallbladder first, gallbladder first. Check to make sure how it's functioning. Obviously, I would do a liver and gallbladder at the same time test. Usually blood works will tell you because certain like ALT and, there'll be certain markers that will be elevated. And your doctor will say, well, it seems like you got an issue here. Then when you combine that with with the gallbladder, and that's identified as a problem, then it really makes sense that the gallbladder issue is exacerbating the liver problems, especially if you don't have cirrhosis. So if no cirrhosis has been identified, then it's the gallbladder exacerbating the issues of the, because it's sort of backing up into the actual liver, and the liver is having difficulty clearance, getting things cleared, detoxed and cleared out. So that's usually what happens. If that happens over a very long period, obviously that will cause some level of liver damage. So it depends on how long that's gone. There's a lot of variability because some people may have still some level of gallbladder function sufficient to allow the clearance of certain, in terms of detoxification, getting stuff out to some extent. So you end up with very little. If you've got severe, particularly with sludge, tends to be the problem, because if it's only stones, it seems to be less of a problem in getting some of the other stuff out. If it's like severe sludge, especially if it's gone into the ducts, that can be a real headache in terms of getting stuff in. You can really have things backed up in the liver. And so what I've found is Tudka is really good at dealing with both sludge and with stones. And I tend to then go for the high of the 1.5 grams of total, and sometimes even if it's really severe sludge, I'll even go to 2 total of choline to try and help that emulsification increase, because that emulsification will also have an effect on the actual sludge in trying to emulsify it and break it down so it can actually clear out. And that's important, even if it's small amounts of sludge coming out and clearing out and being emulsified over time, it will more and more and more of that will happen. And then over time, the ducts will clear out as well. And then you'll be able to push things out, detoxify better, and have better functioning. So a lot of these sort of things can become a problem because of that little gallbladder under your liver, under that bottom of your right side of the rib cage. That little thing can cause a hell of a lot of problems in people's bodies. So that's why I say to people, focus on the gallbladder, because most people have come, as I said, from a high carbohydrate diet and sort of generally speaking, a lower fat intake. And so that's the problem. Now, people like myself had more sludge. I didn't have any stones. I had more sludge. Generally speaking, people that are consuming some level, a bit more fat than other people, not to the level that you would on a low carb diet, that level, but more compared to the general public, will tend to have more sludge than stones. So, for me to resolve my issue with my gallbladder was much faster compared to some other people that it can take a bit longer. So there is the length of resolving the problem can be a bit longer in terms of months and stuff like that. So people need to take that into consideration and be understanding that, Rome wasn't built in a day, so to speak. And so you need to be aware that you can't compare yourself with someone else. The amount of time that requires for you to heal, your gallbladder is going to be different than somebody else, and it is what it is. For a whole lot of factors that I'm not going to cover in this video. But as long as you focus on getting those supplements in to clear and sort it out, it usually resolves itself pretty fast. With milk thistle, I tend to tell people about 500 milligrams. if it's really like there's, and this is really hard to work out whether there's a derangement of the FXR. Like, let's say you've gone back and you've scanned your you basically you've scanned yourself and all that, and you're still getting some lighter sort of your the you seem to be absorbing. You don't have all the fats coming out, but your feces tend to be a lighter color, a tanny color. That could indicate a sort of a malabsorption in terms of, you know, you're still, you've got some level of malabsorption in terms of the bile, and that has to do with the FXR. And you may have to take milk thistle a bit longer to try and fix that problem, to resolve that problem, is what I'm trying to say. So some people have had to take it up to 6 months or more. Most people seem to see a resolution after 3, maybe 4 months. It varies quite a bit. And why? No idea. Nobody has any idea. People will speculate about a whole lot of things, but nobody has any idea. We don't have any science. Nobody's done any science because this has to do with supplements. You think any pharmaceutical company is going to finance it, or any government organisation? No. So we don't know. We've got a whole lot of anecdotes. That's all. So that was the sort of a general covering about issues of digestive issues, to that there is a sort of a hierarchy of testing, you know, gallbladder, gallbladder liver, they get sorted out. Then, you know, if things are still iffy, stomach, and then other issues. Now, once you've resolved the gallbladder, other things, your stomach function may still not be well, or you've done, let's say, a couple of months with taurine and HCl, still doesn't seem to be things, your gut still seems to be a bit iffy. So what can you do? Now, we produce in the stomach a thing called body protection compound 157. You've probably heard Bart used it for his what was it? His I think it was his ankle injury, and used it. But you know, it helps with all the collagen structures. But it actually, a large part of it is in the body is produced in your gut and in your stomach. And most of those structures have got a lot of collagen in them, in particular your whole gut lining. So if there is, in particular, if people have been, I find there's more people that have been on a plant-based diet for a very long time. They tend to have far more problems. You know, they may have diverticulitis. They may have more damage to their colon, more damage to their small intestine and stuff like that. I encourage those people to take BPC 157. You can get it in tablet form from on the Australian Amazon site. It's available. It's not available on the British one. It's not available on the American one. There's a number of other British sites and European sites. There's Polish site. A large proportion now is produced in Poland. The stuff that I get is from the Australian Amazon site, which brings them in from Poland. And a number of other sites are linked to the Polish manufacturing site. So the American company has shifted to Poland, all its manufacturing, because there's, you know, issues with the FDA and stuff like that. but it is a compound. Usually take it for 3 months. Sorry, 2 months. So one a day, 500 milligrams. So you take. They do have a 60 pill pack as well. And then once you've done that, you take a break for 3 months because it does also angiogenesis, so it can produce new blood vessels and stuff like that. We don't want to encourage angiogenesis for too long. Not that it's a bad thing, but we're trying to force the body to do certain things a bit faster. Give it a bit of a break, let the body settle down and heal. Then you can take it for another 2 months. Then that's it for the year. Usually most people, after 2 months taking it, usually resolve their issues completely. It fixes up a lot of the damage and stuff like that. Some people that may have far more severe problems like diverticulitis and stuff like that may need to do the second batch as well for those people. So there is that part. Now you can actually also get the injectable type as well. Obviously, need alcohol wipes to wipe clear the area. Has to be to the fat cells into your stomach. A lot of diabetics, that's how they inject insulin. That's why they get those little overgrowths on their stomach from that. But you can, so you can use that method if you can't get the pills in your country. Just be careful is the way. You can go online and look at videos of people showing you exactly how to do it. There are videos on YouTube. You can just Google, how do I inject into my fat cells, peptides, and they will tell you exactly. They'll show you how to do it properly so you don't do it in the wrong way. If that's your approach, if you've got no problems with that, you've done it before because you may have had insulin injections in the past, you would know. So it'd be second nature to you, precautions and how to do the right thing. This is not medical advice. This is just basically saying if you can't find the tablet form, you may have to go for the injectable form. You need to get proper, you may be able to use pharmacy service or a nursing service or even a naturopathic doctor's service if you don't want to do it yourself. That's a personal preference if you don't feel confident enough. But I'm not giving you advice on how to do it or whether to use this option, But with a tablet form, there's no issue. There, it's just popping it. That's the form that I've used. But in particular, I've bought it for my father. So that's the sort of things to be able to use as sort of, it's not exactly a last resort type thing, but it's usually because trying to fix the gut lining that may have a lot of damage from many years of veganism or very high plant-based diets, it may take 2 years plus to resolve with a carnivore diet or more. The healing is going to be slower. What we're using here is a bit of a cheat to increase a compound that naturally occurs to accelerate that healing process. Okay? So that's what, and possibly, even cereal products seem to help with new stem cells to produce new cells in that. That's another option. You can combine stuff like that. It depends on the damage. How much damage do you have? The sort of options. What are your finances like? So there's a lot of. I can't tell people what to do. I can give you the information. How you action that will depend on your finances, will depend on a whole lot of factors. I just want people to focus on things which are important, like fixing the gallbladder. Some of those supplements are relatively affordable for most people. Taurine is very cheap, and HCl can vary. If you're doing it only for a short period of time, people can manage that expense. Once you get into some of these more high-end things like, your BPCs, your, soil products, the pricing is a bit different. There are other options. I know that Bard offers other options as well. In terms of that, you have to investigate that yourself. I'm not giving you advice how to spend your money or what to do or stuff like that. You need to make that decision. At the end of the day, you need to sort of weigh how long do I want to suffer for. It really comes down to that. Because I know a lot of people have got cancer. Now, I've got a lot of things about senolytics and stuff like that, and a whole lot of different things that can use to reduce the amount of cancer cells in that person. But at the same time, there are other options like polypeptides like TA1 that increases the T cells, which kill off cancer cells. But that's an expensive option. In some countries, you can't even import it, which is a problem. Because, if you want to try and actually improve your immune system and make it more youthful, that's why young people don't get, very rarely do they get cancer, because unless they're really bad from birth, they've got a lot of derangements. It's the accumulation of damage that makes you get immunosenescence, more immune dysfunction, and then you can't kill off the cells, and you could get a proliferation in different tissue types. But again, these sort of things have their expense, but you can't take it with you. Life's important to be able to extend it. So, what I would do, some people will do this. They'll actually use, they'll take some valuables or some bonds or whatever, just sell them and go and buy the stuff, or take out a mortgage on their property, or, additional extend that. People do a whole lot of different things. I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you these things will help. And then whether you're willing, you're taking that responsibility because you're managing your own health. So I can tell you myself, if I ever had cancer, I would definitely take, go and buy deuterium depleted water to reduce the deuterium threshold in my body as fast as possible, to be able to give myself a fighting chance, and then do a lot of the other stuff, get the TA1 peptide, up my taurine levels, improve my vitamin D status, all these sort of things to improve my, do the fasting 3-day reset to be able to kill off some of the damaged immune cells, to force the body to produce some new ones, which are healthier, because that is going to have a suppressive effect on cancer as well. So these are things important to do as strategies. And it's the same thing when you're dealing with your gut, or you're dealing with, other digestive or systems, other components of the digestive system. You've got to look at those sort of things and sort them out. But they, as I said, they have an order, and I'll say this for a final time as I complete this video. At this stage, I want to end it here. Focus always, when you've got digestive issues, your major focus should be on the gallbladder. Once you resolve the gallbladder, I can tell you, a lot of the other stuff resolves a hell of a lot faster after that. I notice it with myself. I didn't have to do anything with my stomach. I didn't have to do anything with my gut. Once the gallbladder got resolved, everything seemed to fall in place very quickly in a very short amount of time. So I was quite surprised how quickly it sorted itself out. Plus, because I transitioned very slowly, and I was dealing with my gallbladder issue at the same time as I was transitioning, I never ended up getting carnivore diarrhea. Never ended up getting any of these problems, which was a good thing. I got some loose stools here or there. It was on off as I was dealing with my gallbladder, but it wasn't like some people have had horrendous sort of experiences in that area. But once my gallbladder got sorted, I went back to having normal feces again, which was great. They were just smaller and less. The only thing I do notice, and on this, because I am a person that does consume dairy, the more dairy I consume, that will have an effect on my stool size. So if I have a dairy, and I've done it actually also, I've had like a pure meat day for like a couple of days, 2, 3 days. My stool reduces to very small, very small. I have 3 dairy days, just dairy days, no meat whatsoever, just have yogurt and cheese and all this sort of stuff. And the two things that I do notice is my stool is much larger. So definitely dairy does generate more stool. That's quite clear. Why? Don't know. I do have one hypothesis that some of the actual elements, first of all, a lot of the foods are sort of tend to be fermented, like yogurts and cheeses and stuff like that. And it seems possibly because, a lot of your stool is a lot of bacteria as well. A large part of it is bacteria. So it seems to basically increase the bacterial numbers inside the colon as a consequence of dairy. So dairy compared to meat and, has seems to have similar effects to fiber, like really creating a more bulkier stool. And it's really because of that effect. Uh, so, but obviously, 24%, like me, require more dairy because we require calcium-rich foods because we don't absorb very well calcium. So it's really important for people with pastoral type genetics. But it's a very interesting observation, and I think it tends to be because I have done a day. Well, yeah, look, it's impossible to do, but I have done variations where I've actually consumed more milk, like just guzzling down milk and having just a bit of yogurt, not a lot of, and no cheese whatsoever for the day. And I have noticed that does decrease the stool. It's not as big. Now, it can be the volume, and I've never really tested it like exactly numbers. So it's just an anecdote. It's not, it hasn't been done properly, weighed properly, the proper sort of science. But it's interesting, and I think it's just because a lot of the bulkiness in a stool is a lot of bacteria. So I think that's possibly the factor. And if I look historically, when I was eating a lot of refined carbohydrates and small amounts of meat with that and all that, I noticed my stools were not as big. Obviously, if you're just eating meat, it's going to be even less compared to carb protein type or type meal. But I do note that's one thing that I've observed between fibre and dairy. It does create a bigger bulk, a bigger stool in that regard. And I suspect it's because of that bacterial sort of component. One, the fibre is there's more fermentation happening, and also the dairy has a lot of bacterial stuff, and I suspect that also is a component that's actually ending up in the colon and sort of seems to amplify the bulkiness of that. Now, obviously, this is not science. It's a speculation on my part. Just things I've observed just from my eating style. I suspect others have done the same thing, have noticed that sort of difference. I know that Alex, one of the guys in in the Netherlands. I won't mention his exact name and other details because there's many Alexes that actually subscribe to me. He knows who he is. Um, leave me a message. I'd be really interested, or if you don't want to leave a message, just email me because you've got my email address. Um, just to tell me because he had his colon removed, um, being on a plant-based sort of diet, and when he actually eats meat primarily, very little, hardly anything. So nothing there to ferment the goons of, in that regard. But I would be interested about whether he's experimented with a lot of dairy products and different dairy products and whether he's noticed a bit of a difference there or not. Obviously, it's it's a hard thing because at the end of the day, I still think it's, you know, it has to get into the colon because that it's the bacteria that actually are bulking that thing up anyway in the first place. So obviously, if it's not getting there, it's not going to bulk up. But I'd be really interested to find out that even there should be some level of low grade fermentation or bacterial activity at the lower part of the small intestine that may produce something. It may not. I could be just, you know, could be completely wrong on this point. I haven't actually really found any. There's nothing out there. Nobody's ever looked at this sort of stuff. I'm just throwing out the gauntlet for, and whether people have had certain type of experience, they've seen certain things or noticed certain things. Um, More a curiosity because I look at myself, or am I a freak? It just happens to me. Um, I, th- I think that there is the more bacteria that end up from the dairy inside the colon. I think there is an effect there that's happening um, in bulking up. I just can't, like, we know that it happens with fibre because they've actually looked at it endlessly, all the goon academics, but nobody's really looked at in terms of fermented dairy foods and stuff like that. So I haven't come across anything. If somebody else has, I'd be interested, just out of curiosity, than anything else. But yeah, this is where I'm going to end it. So if you're having digestive issues, the key thing you need to scan is and test is your gallbladder. That's critical. Once you've worked out what's happening there, then you can move on to sorting out all the other sort of stuff. Because a lot of that I view as downstream. Because once you can actually detox and push things out, once you can actually cleanse your small intestine, you're going to get rid of bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, just by that factor of having the gallbladder work properly and cleansing out and all that. And other things should normalize in the digestive tract. That's been my experience. Um, People may have different experiences. There could be other complicating factors. Please let me know. Leave some comments. Let me know whether you disagree with me, even. And you may have a different theory or different view of these sort of things. I don't mind being challenged in that regard. It's I'm going on anecdotes from other subscribers of people that I've dealt with, resolving their issues, and myself as well. And I'm going off those, and it seems to basically make more sense than most other things. Even some of the literature seems to be pointing in that direction as well. That once you resolve that, it seems that everything else starts flowing much better. It seems like the gallbladder is like one of those um, key areas. It's like if you blockade that, a lot of other things, the liver and a lot of other things downstream just don't work. And, things get backed up in the system and things just get further deranged. And I think this is what actually also potentially people with plant-based in particular, which are exacerbated in the sort of things that happen to them, plus the sad dieters who seem to have a more accelerated worsening of their health issues over time compared to many other people. I think that gallbladder dysfunction plays a big role, personally. And when I look at the stats of the amount of gallbladder disease issues that have emerged in the last couple of decades, and the amount of surgery, gallbladder surgery, has just sort of gone up massively. So there's definitely an issue out there that nobody is really addressing properly with a dietary approach, or proper interventions. It just seems like, cut it out. I mean, even when you do cut out your gallbladder, what happens in the bile duct? The body itself will actually create a new duct, a new location to store away some bile. So it definitely, the body wouldn't do that, trying to recreate the gallbladder if it didn't need it. Obviously, if it gets infected or has problems with it, there is a risk for people. And I still think that even under those circumstances, if you start, taking things like taurine, TUDCA, which has component of taurine, you're eating a species-appropriate diet, you're going to reduce the amount of LPS in the system. In particular, if you've got like a sort of a low-grade potential risk for infection, that's where I will go, okay, I need to get taurine in, because I know that it lowers LPS, lipopolysaccharides. It suppresses also sepsis in the actual system, so it reduces the potential for these risks. So I need to get it in. I know it could cause some issues down the track in terms of, improving the stomach function, then causing the sort of carnival diarrhea sort of thing. Depends what your circumstances are, then I would say, use bile salts until you can resolve that thing, because I would rather try and keep the gallbladder because it has an important function rather than rip it out. I think a lot of doctors in the future will regret, like they did with tonsils, because it's part of the immune system, ripping them out in the 60s and 70s and all that, and 80s. And now they rarely do it in very extreme cases. And I think there are a lot of medications that can also break down. They do have side effects. They can break down gallstones and stuff like that and improve the functioning. They can be used in preference to cutting it out, so to speak. But at the same time, as I said, it's important to find out that you've got the issue and resolve it before it gets worse. And then you're put in that difficult spot where I can't give you medical advice on whether to remove it or not. I would do everything. This is my personal opinion. You take your own risk. I would personally, in my case, try and do everything to avoid going down that path, and looking for options, and and possibly even for a period of time having to take antibiotics and a few other things, antivirals or whatever, like ivermectin, something like that, which sort of can suppress some of these pathogens and whatever else, in order to give time for things to resolve themselves, and then use the methods that I mentioned earlier. But as I said, this is not medical advice. I'm just telling you what I would do. But if you're not at that high risk point, you don't get there, and I hope you don't. But you really need to be proactive in dealing with this, is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to make it quite clear that if you've got digestive issues, you've got to focus on sorting out the gallbladder, and also getting diagnosis on the gallbladder, because a lot of people focus on a whole lot of other things and they're getting the whole thing the wrong way around. You know, your focus should be on the gallbladder. And once you've sorted that out, a lot of the other digestive issues seem to resolve themselves over time much quicker. But as I said, there are options like BPC, 157, and a number of other things to be able to be done to improve that. Anyway, that is it. Have a nice day and see yous.